Carolyn, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. December is always an exciting time for communicators because it speeds up and slows down. And then which slow down is nice right now. So that's good.
Get a little bit of a break. Well, you have such an amazing professional background, and I love your energy. I saw you at the Cohesion Conference this year. I watched you facilitate the keynote of the late Walter Roth, and I moderated the panel you were on about preparing for future challenges in internal communications. So I'm super excited to have this opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into your background and get some nuggets of information from you. So let's dive right in. So I was looking over your website. It's carolynjordanclark.com about your aha moment when you were considering a career in communications. It's a great story, and there's a lot of good advice in there. So there's a lot of great advice all over your website. But would you mind recounting the story for our listeners and walking us through how you got into internal communications?
Yes. And honestly, I don't even remember what I've said previously. So that's what's interesting. Because I've had a couple of aha moments in my career, and they all seem to follow when I thought I was going to do one thing and then something happened. And so started when I was a news producer, and something happened there that opened my eyes up to PR or to public relations. And then once I was in public relations and I'd really done a variety of things, I'd kind of challenged myself to try all kinds of things. Once the one area that I'd never worked in was internal communications. And so once I had my daughter, which was in 2014, I thought, interestingly, that maybe internal comms would be a little bit of a slower pace than doing kind of, news PR or doing, some of the more glamorous communication stuff. Little did I know we had a pandemic coming a few years later. But yeah, for me, it was this moment of like, I love connecting with people and I love connecting company missions to people. And I also love building businesses, like small businesses, again, just connection. And I realized pretty quickly that like internal comms is all about connection. And so for me, that was that moment. I was like, you know what? I don't need to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner and work red carpets anymore. I am okay with literally figuring out how to communicate organizational change because it actually is just as impactful, if not more. So I don't know if that's the aha moment, but that was definitely a good moment for me.
There's a lot that I wrote on your website, and I wanna try to pepper in some of those personal questions about celebrities and stuff, but I also wanna know just about your experience because it's so broad. Can you just paint a highlight reel for their listeners? Just a quick, top moments of your career, and where you've worked?
Yeah. So from the time I was very, very little, and I mean like probably 3 years old, I wanted to be a reporter. There was some reason I loved interviewing people. I loved asking questions. I was that little kid that would literally be like, so tell me about, why did you make this decision? I mean, it was bizarre. And my mom used to kind of joke that I was like that all growing up. And so even when I was in high school, we had something called Channel One News where we were like, we were using Channel One, which was an official news station, and doing our own newscast. So I knew that news or producing of some sort was what I wanted to do. And so when I went to college, that's what I focused on, was all news. And when I graduated, my first job, I was 21, got my first job as a news producer at an ABC TV station. And, it's funny, you've got these dreams, and then all of a sudden reality hits. And for me, reality was the 2004 election. It's a really complicated time. And I was producing the news in a small North Carolina market, and the local news was harsh. It was just harsh. And so around that time, I had applied to become this. It's sounding not like a highlight reel, but you can chop it up if you want the highlights. At that time, I had been long hearing about this program at NBC in New York called the Page Program. Some of the most famous broadcasters came through the Page Program. And so I applied and luckily got an interview and went through the whole process of flying to New York and all this stuff. Anyway, ended up getting the job with NBC and moved to New York City, which was my dream, and got to work on Saturday Night Live and Conan O'Brien's show and the Today Show, and really just got to meet some incredible people. And then after I'd been in that program for a while, it's almost like an apprenticeship, right? So you're paid garbage and you're doing a lot of work, but you're, literally, in the room with incredible people that you've been watching on television your whole life. So, right around after that program, I started doing PR. Someone had reached out to me and I got into PR. And that's really where my first understanding of like messaging and red carpets and all of that happened. And so I spent a few years doing celebrity PR and working for um, different celebrities. And then I got into tech PR and I spent 10 years at Yahoo, which was kind of incredible. I can tell you hopefully you'll hit on that, but I can tell you all kinds of amazing things I learned there. And then now I'm still in tech. Here we are, like however many years later, 13, 15, something years later. Ooh, that was a long, I can tell you a little
Yeah.
more if you want.
I do wanna comment that I do remember Channel One as well.
Oh
We
my
watched it,
God, right?
yes, like, it was, like, news, like, over lunch hour or something. I
And
totally
some of
remember that.
Yeah, and Anderson
Mhm.
Cooper, Lisa Lane, like some of the greatest
Mhm.
broadcasters from CNN started at Channel One, and so I was very into that idea that I wanted to be
Yeah,
on
that's aw
Channel One.
yeah. Well, can you tell us a little bit more about your current role, at Open Door?
Yeah. Yeah, so I have been in Open Door a little over 2 months now, and, Open Door is a really fast-growing startup. It's a public company now, but my job is essentially exactly what you can imagine, internal comm, so making sure that our employees are understood, heard, informed, all of that good stuff, and then I also oversee employer brand, which is essentially, how we brand the company to future employees. And so it's definitely all in that space of employers, so the people who are behind the scenes and running the business. And I'm excited about Open Door because it is really a disruptor. I mean, if you look at what Open Door is trying to do with one of the most stressful parts of your life, buying or
Yeah,
selling a
especially
home.
now,
Oh
right?
my
Like, right now
God,
with
yes.
the markets everywhere being wild.
Yes, and I think we've come to be gotten used to being able to do things with the click of a button, right? Like if I
Mhm.
want a donut, all I have to do right now is click a few buttons, have the finances to do it and get it delivered. And so we as most of us are getting more used to that and we're starting to see these antiquated, processes like buying a car, buying a home as like what the heck? That doesn't seem easy. And so that's the whole concept behind Open Door is
Yeah.
really to make it easier for people.
Yeah,
I'm
I
loving
love
it.
that the tech bringing technology is changing some of those antiquated processes and trying to make it much easier, faster, better for the,
Yeah,
consumer. Yeah, so I'm gonna
exactly.
keep an
Yeah.
eye on that for sure. I wanna move into our first segment, story time.
Welcome to story time. Story time. Story time.
Let me tell you a story.
I feel like this is gonna be right up your alley because 'cause I've seen you tell great stories. I wanna go back to something you said about working at NBC on Conan O'Brien on Saturday Night Live. Do you have any memorable moments or learning experiences from that time that you can share with us today?
Yeah, gosh, there's so many to pull from, and they all ultimately. I think if you asked me 10 years ago, I would probably say something different, but maybe because I'm a mom now and I'm about to be 40, I feel like I'm in a little bit more reflective phase of my life. But for me, it was really the relationships. It was seeing how even from the highest level, so like Conan O'Brien himself treated everybody down the line, including me as the little production assistant, right, that was working on it. One of the things that I learned there was just this importance in being, frankly, a good person, like respecting other people. There are all these funny moments that I got to be a part of. Like I literally remember my first interaction with Conan and there weren't a lot. Like I literally am not sure, again, I was the lowest on the totem pole. I was my job to just do some very basic things. But he found out I was from North Carolina and made a few interesting comments, like was asking me some questions about North Carolina. And what that said to me, one, it immediately took down some of my walls, because who doesn't love, especially when they're 22, or how I was 22, I think, at the time, but like, you want to talk about home, or you want to, you want to have that connection. And so him asking me specifically about North Carolina, and of course he was asking me very funny questions, I think about squirrels. It was very weird, but it was endearing. And so that, again, the relationships and the treating everybody with respect, because there were certainly examples of people not doing that, and the news, if you watched the morning show on Apple TV or any of that, some of that is pretty accurate. So finding those really great moments was really good. I will also say another wonderful moment, Lester Holt. At the time, I don't remember if he was actually anchoring. I don't know what he was anchoring, but he did a small group chat with maybe 10 of us, and spent all this time talking about his son. And again, just those moments to be in front of these people and see them almost like, disrobed is not the right way to say it, but unguarded, and was just showed me that authenticity goes really, really far. That's probably not the sexiest story you're looking for, but
I
that's
always, I
where I'm
always
at.
feel like you can tell a good leader by how they, treat people around them.
Whew. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. I
100%.
have to ask, who's your favorite SNL cast member of all time?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. The nicest I ever got to work with was Rachel Dratch, and it was
Mhm.
very, very quickly. She's just hilarious. But my job when I was at SNL was something called the VIP coordinator, and so the cast, if they had a special guest, would bring them to the person who was in my role, and we would take care of them. And so Rachel Dratch's, I think her mother or her father, someone in her family was coming, and she was so wonderful and sweet. But yeah, I really love Rachel Dratch. All of those incredible people. I mean, Maya Rudolph, all the women. Gosh, there's some incredible women on that show, currently and in the past, I think. So gosh, yeah, it's funny. It's really funny because the two big moments for NBC, I was actually working. One was when Ashley Simpson, it was this big
Oh,
drama about her lip syncing.
yes. The music
That
started
was,
playing.
yes. And
Yes.
so that was a big moment. I was there for that one. And then the other big moment is I was a production assistant on the Hurricane Katrina concert, and I was in the room with Mike Myers and Kanye West during
Oh,
that time. So that
that's
was a really, really eye-opening moment for me, where I was like, "Oh God, this is interesting." So
yeah. That's so interesting. I bet you've seen some things, and that's so interesting.
yeah.
Quickly, I wanna go back to Yahoo. You worked there, is it 10 years?
Yeah.
Can you share a story of something you're most proud of that you accomplished at Yahoo during your tenure there?
Yeah. God, when I think about Yahoo, and I think most people who are there, there's just this like happiness. I don't want to be all happy, happy joy, but I mean, Yahoo was my people. I loved being there. I loved the people there. One of the projects that loved and I was really, really proud of was every year we put out the list of the top searches. And so it would be
Mhm.
like, the top 10 searches. Of course, it was always Britney Spears or, that kind of thing. But it, doing that project was really fun. And then that's kind of where I got turned a little bit into being a little bit of talent, because I would go on and do interviews. I did a lot of radio during that time and talked about the top searches. And so for me, it was just really fun to mix this idea of, you've got data, you've got technology, and then you've got this like producing side. So that was really fun for me doing that every year. And totally side note, my boss from that time is my boss again now at Open Door. And she brought this up to me this week, because December 1st and 2nd, like the
Mhm.
beginning of the year was always, I mean, the end of the year is always when we would do these big lists, and it was
Mhm.
huge. It was the biggest project. And so she brought it up to me this week, and she's like, "Remember when?" I was like, "Yeah, I do." It was a while ago.
That's awesome. Did you make that move because she was there? Did that help? I mean, it sounds like you guys have a good relationship.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's an incredible leader, and I have known her my entire career. I've known her since 2006. So it's kind of like going home when you get to work for somebody that's seen you for your entire career. So that's a big reason why I made the jump.
Yeah, knows your strengths, knows your passions. That's great.
Exactly.
I'm gonna move us into the next segment called Getting Tactical.
I'm trying to figure out tactics. And to be perfect.
I feel like you have a real passion for crisis communications. That comes out on your website, on your resume. You've taught a class on crisis communications at your alma mater, Appalachian State University. The first paragraph on your website, you talk about navigating more crises than you can count. You have a passion for navigating difficult situations, which I love because I also love crisis communications. The preparation, I don't want to say it's like a game, but just like the intensity, the adrenaline when you're in those. Is there a case study either from like teaching or that you know of, or an experience that you can talk about that would help listeners understand like your role in crisis communications, or an event that's happened that you've really had to stop, focus, and execute communications on?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, there's so many, to be honest. I'm trying to think of ones that would be most interesting, but I think the thing that I realize the most about crisis comms is one is changed, and that's something that I've in my class when I haven't taught in about 2 years, but I taught the crisis comms class at Appalachian for a while, and one of the things that was crazy to me was that there were so many opportunities to talk about crisis and so much more as time had shared. So like, of course, the introduction of social media and that, 2-minute reaction to things versus what would have been in the newspaper taken maybe 24 hours of a reaction
Mhm.
time. So there have been a lot of different ones. Everything from, the gosh, I mean, I can tell you a couple. I want to be careful with some of them because some of them are super sensitive.
Yeah, that's why I said maybe if there's a user case that you were particularly were fond of.
Oh gosh, I mean, there's been so many. I think one that really is top of mind for me that was a big moment was when I think it was in I don't even remember what year. Maybe it was late 2000s during another election. The election always brings, good crisis work, but at the time I was the PR lead for Yahoo News and Yahoo Finance, and we had a bit of an open mic situation, um, and where one of our lead reporters was caught on an open mic and said something somewhat inappropriate. I mean, he's gone on to be an incredible talent, so I won't share more about him directly, but one of the things that happened in that moment is we of course had to immediately go into mode of, preparing statements not just for the public but for the different candidates, which was really complicated. And so, will say I love the adrenaline of a crisis. I love the adrenaline of putting pen to paper, of I love live editing. It's funny, some people hate that. I love writing a statement and then reflecting, like literally live time reflecting on it. Um, for me, there's so many levels of crisis. Crisis that involves loss of life is a completely different, I mean, just a different ball game there. So yeah, there's been a lot. I mean, my class, it's funny, during my one of my classes was during the time when, just to throw it back to a celebrity reference, was when Lamar Odom had gotten caught um in some bad situations, and one of my students at the time were really into the Kardashians, and so we did a case study on that. We did a case study on.
Do you have like a playbook that sits on your shelf that if a hacking situation, you've got some stuff already formulated?
I think it's probably less on my desk and more in my head. But I will say there are a couple of things that I go back to regularly. Like if there is a serious corporate crisis, then I literally will pull out a textbook like the Lainey Davis crisis textbook just to like remind myself. But yeah, some of it is just you get used the tactics, since the segment is about tactics, right? The tactics don't necessarily change. in a crisis, it's really about the messaging and the nuances. And so the tactics, I think, you're pretty good at, you got them kind of locked in of exactly what needs to happen, when, how fast, whatever. It's really the nuancing of messaging. Um, and yeah, I will say another time working in crisis that was interesting. Before I came to Open Door, I was at GoDaddy, and we were navigating. One of the things with GoDaddy is we are the domain provider for the 20 million customers, right? And so, or at least that I bet it's more at this point. But so you can imagine really having to navigate when a site is appropriate, when it is not. And there's some very clear, I mean, GoDaddy does an incredible job of having very clear policies around that, but it's often a conversation about when to react, how to react, and then to be prepared for backlash, particularly in a time like this with politics.
Right. I want to, a cousin to this a little bit is like mergers and acquisitions. You mentioned that as well. I love, I've worked at companies where mergers and acquisitions have been a thing. I want to get your thoughts on the role that internal communication should be playing, let's say in a merger or an acquisition. Because I've been in companies where day one, internal comms is at the table. I've been at companies where the day that it happens, that's when they bring internal comms in. So I'd love to get your perspective on that. And if there's a leader listening out there who doesn't understand the role of IC, what would you say to them?
Yeah, thank you. It's such a good question. And I think this is one place where a lot of people get it wrong when it comes to mergers and acquisitions. And so, my philosophy in general with internal comms, I've said this in different interviews and different things, is really thinking about internal comms from the perspective of empathy, advocacy, and truth. And so it's something that I used to work with this guy named Sean Funder, and it's something that he taught me, which was, if you can tie everything to those three pillars, then you're doing your job right. And when it comes to mergers and acquisitions, there are a couple things that immediately happen. One, if internal comms is not involved, let's hope that they've got someone from HR comms or HR engagement, employee experience involved, because if they don't, they are going to miss the fact that all of the folks that are coming in or potentially losing their jobs, all of the folks who are at the company where that's being merged or that is acquiring, everybody has what we call the me questions. You immediately go to the me questions. You immediately go to the, how does this affect me, my job, my future, all of that. And as internal communicators who are based or rooted in this idea of empathy, empathizing with the employee, advocating for their needs, and then telling the truth, even if the truth is uncomfortable, with that mentality in the merger and acquisition space, you can get really, really much farther, much quicker in getting people integrated into the company. So I think it's crucial that internal comms is involved, one from a literal tactics standpoint, but also from being in the room and being able to advocate. And I think the other thing, I did a lot of reading on mergers and acquisitions when I was part of the merger between AOL and Yahoo under Verizon. And, these people, telling the truth is difficult, I think sometimes, because, for some leaders, they're afraid. But being able to tell the truth is being kind. And so pushing these leaders to tell the truth, not to spin a story, but or to admit, like, we don't know the answer to that, or we don't know what's going to happen. So I think just having an internal communicator in the room is crucial, because if you don't, then you're playing catch up, which is kind of what you were alluding to, which is like, if you're brought in at the last minute, you're relaying the news of the merger or you're relaying the news of the acquisition, but you are not thinking about that people perspective very well.
Right.
But
And sort of
I also
walking through
think
that employee experience.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that people get wrong, which I'm not suggesting that I have gotten right either, but mergers and acquisitions are a long game. I mean, you cannot, it is from the moment you pre-sign to sign to close to announce to 6 months, 12 months down the road when you're integrating these people, it's almost like onboarding, right? I think if you're really appropriately doing this, you're thinking about onboarding and you're thinking about all these different touch points in the journey of that employee or leader who is coming into a company. There's so many. Yeah, I actually love that space, but it is hard to get it right, I think.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it is a long game. The day of the merger or the acquisition, right? You could be working on through tech stacks. Who's got the internet site we're going to use? What are they on the same payroll schedule? All that could be going on for, a year after. So it is a real long game.
Yeah.
Yeah. I noticed you taught public speaking. When you said
Oh,
something about not being for leaders not being afraid to admit they're wrong. I also taught public speaking, and that's where I learned when you don't have an answer, don't be afraid to say, I don't know, but let me find out and get back to you. So I have to
oh,
ask. I have to ask this question because when I would teach, I would talk through my students with this. When you have to speak publicly, do you still get a little nervous?
me personally?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny. I was just talking to my daughter. So my daughter is 7, and has been cast in a play. She's the youngest in this play, and she was like, "What do I do when I get up there and get nervous?" And I said, "Well, first of all, I think everyone gets nervous or gets that your body has a reaction, right?
Yeah.
Your hands sweat, your blood pressure rises, all that." So I was trying to explain to her that I take all that and I channel it into energy versus channeling it into fear, and
Yeah.
that literally in my mind, I go through this like swing where it's like, ooh, scared, fear. Oh man, I can go one direction or the other. I'm gonna just eat it. I said to her, like, I eat the nervousness and I spit it back out as energy. She was like, oh. And I was like, yeah, that's how I do it. But of course you get that anxiety. And so much of speaking is listening, or it is particularly in the interview, is like listening to what's been said. But I actually hated teaching public speaking. I'll tell you that right now. I loved the crisis class I taught, but public speaking with people, oh my gosh, it was just, I don't know how you felt about teaching it, but it was not my favorite class to teach.
I loved it because I think there's honestly a part of my personality where I have this like stand-up comedy routine that I like to just entertain. And so it was this awesome opportunity to have that engagement. And
Yeah.
also public speaking, they say, what did I read? Like you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. That's how much people are afraid of it. And so just being a part of like trying to help people know like it's okay to be nervous. Like that's why I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you. I think there's this misconception that great public speakers are not nervous. And just want to get that out for anyone who may be an IC leader and is still nervous to get up at the company all hands. It's so
Oh
common. I just want
yeah.
to get that out there because that's what I would tell them. It's not about you're not getting rid of the butterflies, you're channeling them and teaching them how to fly together.
Exactly. And I sort of always use this thing like go to the end of the story. So, and that's what I would say to somebody who's not great at public speaking or doesn't feel confident is like go to the end of the story. What actually is the worst thing that could happen? Like you get up there and you pass out. I mean, unlikely. You get up there and you stumble, could be endearing. I mean, I always sort of say like play out the scenarios in your head so that um, that you know. And I also think being prepared. So I am not someone that usually prepares a ton. Um, if I had more time, I would prepare more. But I think preparing the right amount is really great. I think over preparing and under preparing is bad. So it's like figure out what the right amount is. Um, yeah, it's
Yeah.
ooh,
Well, I also
that's
spent
a
time
good
in that
question.
class teaching the audience how to be a good audience. I think that was the
Oh,
other
yes.
component is you may not really be interested in the topic, but show some excitement because when you're up there, you could use people who are nodding their head and smiling and going, "Oh
Exactly.
yeah, yeah." So that was a big part of it too. So I just
Yeah.
enjoyed it because it was sort of like my side hustle. After I go work full
Yeah.
time, go
Well,
to teach a
I
class.
I bet they loved it though. I mean, I don't know if you experienced this with teaching. I know there are a lot of people in internal comms who teach, and it's it just shakes you out of your day to day. And I
Mhm.
did love the interaction with students. I learned things. I loved being able to use all these real life examples, kind of what you were talking about, like bringing in, you know, I could bring in scenarios, particularly when I was at Yahoo. I could literally bring in scenarios and workshop them with the class. And that was fun. I think they loved it and I loved it. And yeah.
Want to switch gears a little. I want to talk about your ever after or after ever communications. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and what the driving force was for you to start that?
Yeah, I thank you for asking about it. Yeah, it's funny. Everybody always says ever after, and I love correcting them because that's the whole thing with the name. Is so my daughter's name is Everly, and we call her Ever. And I always sort of say that it wasn't until I really had her that had this like confidence, this different kind of confidence. And so after Ever was literally like the name I came up with, like after her, after Ever, I was able to like get the guts to like be a strong, independent, woman communicator or whatever. But how it came to be is after 10 years at Yahoo, and again, I already talked about how much I loved my time at Yahoo. I needed something. I needed to kind of break out of what I had been doing for a while. And so I started this consulting company, and immediately I was incredibly lucky and immediately got some really great clients. So I was working with GoDaddy was one of my clients, Pandora. There are a couple other Simpplr actually was a client. So there I got to just meet all of these people. And so I'm still doing it on the side, but I did it exclusively for a year. And it was really shook some fears that I had away, fears of like stability. I'm a stability seeker. I love having a job. I love having benefits. I love having that stuff. And, for a year kind of hustling really gave me a different perspective, a different flexibility. Um, and it kind of proved some worthiness for me. Like I was getting people were paying for my brain, and which I'm sure they were at other times, but it just felt more than ever people were specifically paying me, just me, for something I could deliver. And so it was really great. But my daughter, I'll also just say this. My daughter someday, I can't wait to see what she's like when she's like 15, is going to hate us because both my husband and I have, so I did I started after Ever Communications. And then I started this like, I do watercoloring for fun. So then I was like, oh, I'll do this like After Ever Musings thing. And then my husband created a woodworking company that's called Ever Woodworks. And we were like, people are like, y'all need to chill out. So my daughter, I bet when she's 15, she's going to be like, what the hell, mom?
You got to get all like t-shirts made
Oh my
and
God. I mean, I have a tattoo. I mean, it's like,
oh,
that
that's
says
cool.
forever. I mean, it is. Yeah.
That's
So
cool.
we'll see. I like a brand, I'm a good
Yeah,
branding person.
part of your employer brand role.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, last question before we move on into our next segment. I'm curious if you have any advice for listeners who are having trouble getting leaders engaged in the internal communication process and strategy. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's figuring out how to talk their game. I mean, it is figuring out what they care about and then using that to prove your case, right? Whether it's data, whether it's sentiment, whether it's um content, whatever it is. I think if you want somebody to believe what you're doing matters, you have to learn to speak their language. And I would say, understanding the business is crucial, right? Like it seems basic, but if you think about it, most of us kind of sit at this like this top level. We don't go deep into the business, right? Because we're just communicating the highest level things. But in order to speak the language of engineering leaders or even your CEO and your C-suite, you've got to understand what makes them tick and then put it in front of them. And I think that means developing different strategies, even if your ultimate approach is sorry, your ultimate strategy is the same or your goal, how you approach it and you get buy-in is going to differ. So I would also ask them, like, what matters to you? That's one of the things, an advantage if you're new somewhere is saying, what matters to you? Because I have notes from my first couple of weeks here at Open Door where I'm like, I've been writing down what matters to particular leaders. I have this, what I call my like little black book where I literally take all the people I've met and I make notes so that I can refer back if I have to present something to them or I need their buy-in. I can kind of change my approach a little bit so that to speak their language or to remember something about them that's important just to get that trust. So I would say put the effort into getting to know the people you want to buy in so that you can sell them.
Yeah. Can you just talk a little bit about that? I know you're new to Open Door. I think you said 2 or 3 months. What does your first 90 days look like for someone who's leading internal communications? What's your first 90 days?
Yeah, I think it's all the categories that you can imagine. So it's assessing the tools first of all, like understanding what are the channels we use, how are they being used, what are the tools we use, like the process, the actual, are you using Airtable, are you using Asana, are you using Excel, how are you tracking your your content? So the basics of that stuff. So maybe tech stack type stuff, and then a lot of listening, a lot of reading. I kind of joked with my boss, like I felt like I was in school. I treat the first 2 months, so that's really the first 60 days, especially the first 30, like I am in school studying for a test. I mean, I print out. I come back and reference it. If I hear somebody's name, I mean, I have it all right here to the side. I keep looking over here because I literally, if I hear someone's name that I'm not familiar, I pull up that org chart and understand like our operating model. So I think, again, for me, it is understanding the tech stack so that you can know what you're messing with, what you've got. Understanding the business so that you can really feel like you can talk about it. And then it is about relationships. I mean, meeting with people, understanding them, looking at how they talk, getting perspective on the tenured people versus the new folks. So that's really it is a pretty for me, it's a pretty regimented onboarding experience. And I think if you're coming in somewhere and you have a good leader, they're doing some of that for you. They are guiding you in that onboarding process. But and then I think the other thing is testing. I love to push boundaries, and so pushing a little bit of something to, maybe it's something to prove yourself, or maybe it's something to just like test the waters on. But they hired you for a reason, and so bringing that, like, I'm not one that's going to sit on my hands for a while. During my 30 days studying, I'm also acting. I mean, I'm doing work. So, and I think the other thing I would say is like making sure you're not coming in those first 90 days and acting, you don't know it all. In fact, I don't think people really know it all for 365 days minimally. Things are changing so fast. So I think being able to admit, like, oh, it seems like this is this way. And when somebody says, no, that's not it. And you're like, okay, being able to just admit that you're learning, but that doesn't stop you from acting. I think that's probably how, at least that's how I'm spending my time.
I want to take that idea and I want to move it into our next segment called Rip from the Headlines.
You hear the news?
Extra, extra, read all about it.
I want to focus on the pandemic. You clearly started your current role middle of a pandemic. I'm curious what your takeaway learnings are from that in terms of, you have your first 90 days, but how is the pandemic changing that? How do you feel like it's changing the idea of the new employee experience or the employee experience? What challenges did you encounter being fully remote, trying to learn a new company?
I have the luxury of being a really extroverted, confident person. And so I can, which is not the case for everybody. So I was able to really come in on every Zoom call and make a connection, right? That I don't think is the case for so many people. And to read, I have a high like EQ, right? Like I can sense when people have something going on. I tend to be an empath, and so I can feel it. So I had that kind of a luxury. I think for people who are not in that space or who are slower to warm up, which by the way is completely great and appropriate. Like you've got to have that balance. Um, for those folks, I think there's a big struggle. I think there's a struggle with connection. I think there's a struggle with I love exposing my personal life, like my daughter interrupting or my dog barking. It immediately takes down a barrier that would never have happened 3 years ago in my life. I would have been mortified to admit that, I have a kid at home or something like that. That just would have been awful. But I do think that personal professional barrier has been changed a little bit, which I see as a positive thing. But not everybody would, right? If you're shy or you're private, that might not be as easy. I also think just like consistently checking in. It's funny, today I think was my 60 day. I think is my 60 day at Open Door. at least I got a note that said, "Hey, you've been here for 60 days, connect with your manager," right? Luckily, I connect with my manager every day, but again, some of those like built-in things are more important during this time where you're not going to just like walk by somebody's desk and be like, "Hey, how's it going? How's your first month?" You got to really build in those intentional moments of connection. I also think one thing that we're not talking enough about, particularly I'm not talking enough about because I'm in tech, is we've got people who've been going into work this entire time. And you know, whether you're working for a healthcare system, whether you're working for a manufacturing system or company, I mean, so I think it is really important that you try to broaden your perspective because it's easy to think we're all working from home. Well, that's not true. And so just kind of thinking of the full picture has been harder than it maybe was in the past.
Yeah, is we're gonna have a lot of companies. We're gonna have people going in and people who are now fully remote, and how to create an equitable employee experience is going to be a huge driver going forward.
Yeah, it's a little worrisome, I think. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, because, I worry that sometimes that people will just go, "Well, we'll just do it on Zoom," thinking about, "Well, we'll just do this meeting, but now we'll have a Zoom component," and not really thinking about that experience and how to make it best for remote employees other than just, we'll throw a Zoom call, information in there. So I think
Yeah.
that's a big interesting part of this pandemic is thinking about the experience and how to make it better. Yeah, I want to move into our last segment. It's called Asking for a Friend.
Just asking for a friend. Hey,
So it's getting your
asking for a
advice.
friend.
Everyone I know is trying to get better at their jobs. What does that look like for you?
I think it looks like having a little more humility. And also, you know, especially as I've gotten more confident and gotten into higher roles, it would be easy for me to just say like, this is the way I'm in charge. This is the way I want you to do it. And for me, I think I feel like I can learn from any level at any time. And so really giving some of the other levels an opportunity to bring their ideas to the table. So that's one. And then honestly, I think the other thing for me is surrounding myself with people who are very different. And I'll give I'll give an example about this. But at GoDaddy, um, I had this person on my team. His name is Noah Plum. And Noah, I always say, is the yin to my yang. I mean, we are so opposite. We work very, very differently. We everything's different. We're just very, very different people. And I have learned more from him than maybe anybody else about how to think differently. And I think we have this, you know, I've always had this tendency to want to surround myself with people who I know how they work, I know what they do, I know what I can rely on them for. I want them to be hard workers just like me, all this, that, and the other. And what I've realized, is, particularly in the last couple of years, is that I actually would rather surround myself some of that. I need the people who are going to do the things I need them to do, but I need people who are going to push and challenge me and who are going to be like, oh my God, I've never even thought about it like that. Or I've never even, you know, that's never crossed my mind. So for me, it's really the learning comes from surrounding myself with people who are different and also letting people screw up. I mean, I used to be very afraid of failure. I'm a perfectionist. Um, but I think letting people make mistakes and supporting them through those mistakes has been a really big learning for me in the last few years. But yeah, it's funny when I think about teams. I've worked with incredible people. When I think about the people who have been on my teams, whether it was at Yahoo or at Verizon or at GoDaddy or Pandora, they just incredible people who are so different, who I still am in touch with. And I just like work is a lot of our life. Like what, you know, some great people.
I spend more time with coworkers than I do my spouse. So
Ex- exactly.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Until the
absolutely.
pandemic. Now I spend too much time with my family.
That's true. We're just right across the hall from each
Exactly.
other. So, how are you thinking about the future of your career? When you think about the future of IC, how are you thinking about the future of your career?
Yeah. It's funny. I have this conversation, not to name drop the Simpplr CEO, but I know the CEO at Simpplr well. And love
He's
him,
a great, a
and
good human being. Yeah.
he's a incredible human being. And one of the things that I have said to him often, and I think I maybe said this in the cohesion panel, I can't even remember, but like, I would love to get to a world where there is a bot doing so much of what I do, right? There's going to be some things which I realize is like people would hate that. But what I mean by that is there are a lot of things that we're spending time on as internal communicators that just have not been the process has not been fixed, has not been automated. And so we are spending time on things that we shouldn't because there's no other option. And so my hope for the role in the future is that things get automated so that what we're really good at, which is storytelling, messaging, empathy, advocacy, all of that, that we can spend all of our time on that, not figuring out how to get a damn distro list to work. And so I see the future, whoever can get that right, and I have talked to Dheeraj about it, is gonna be the winner in the internal comm space, because right now nobody's doing it well. Nobody is automating. Nobody is setting up these prompts to help people remember when they need to communicate or check in or do things like that. So I hope in, I don't know, 5-10 years that we have a very different role as internal communicators, and we really are advisors and not as much doing all the little tiny tactical things. But right now we're doing it all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I will say
yeah.
from my personal experience with Simpplr, of course, they hear the problems loud and clear. And I think that, that's one thing I really like working about a company, like working at Simpplr, is because they're a company that when I look back on my career and all the struggles that I've had in internal communications, right, just to get something approved, it takes 2 weeks to get it through the
Yeah.
chain and then back, then changes, right? And then to have a company that's listening and wants to solve for that really makes me feel like I'm proud of that, because the sleepless nights I've had, the frustration I have felt, they're listening, and I really love that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great, I was actually thinking about this morning. I literally, I think I got 5 vendor emails this morning, and I was so annoyed. I get it. By the way, I get it. As a former PR person that had to do cold calls, I get it. But for some reason, and I think I was just annoyed this morning. I was like, oh my God, there's just so many solutions out there. It is so complicated. I wish I could get them all in a room together to hear the problems together. Like, let's put all our power together and solve it. But I do love that about Simpplr. And the thing that I really love is I will get on a call and I will say, that is not going to work. And they will hear me out. And I kind of love that. So yeah, a future with a great tool sounds nice.
Fingers crossed. Well, Carolyn, this has been so much fun. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and learning more about your background. You have an amazing professional history. But before I let you go, let listeners know where they can find you. And if there's 1, 2, 3 more pieces of advice or information we didn't cover today, feel free to get that out now for our listeners.
Okay. I think probably on LinkedIn is a great place to start. So feel free to connect with me there. I do have a website, the longest name ever, CarolynJordanClark.com. I put stuff on there. Don't, there's not that much there, but feel free. No, I mean, I think the biggest thing, again, and I'm in this very reflective state of just the relationships. The relationships you're making are crucial, whether it's with employees, one-to-one, or with the leaders. And I'm just tired of working for mean people. I haven't worked for a lot of mean people. I've been very lucky, but like, nobody wants to work for. So if you're going to just get out of the way. Like, that's my biggest piece of advice. It's like, let's work for good people. Like, let's just try, like, we're all here. We're making, we're making money. We have to pay our bills. Let's try to have kindness and be good to each other and push each other. And let's try to get that ego out of the way if we can. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, like, if you are a vendor, keep trying on those emails. Like, I feel like it's, or if you're somebody that wants to break into the business, like, I'll get emails in LinkedIn or LinkedIn messages. It's like, I just want to talk to you. And I would say, just keep doing it. One day somebody's going to come through. And so keep trying to make those connections. Yeah. And just try to be good people. Don't work for if you're working for go somewhere else. Like, it's not worth it. Maybe
That's right.
they'll leave, but
I think we're starting to see some of that happening, um, which is
yeah,
great. People have options, especially with the idea of remote work that's opened up. People have more
yeah,
options now.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
good.
Well,
Well,
again, thank you
thank
for
you.
joining me today, Carolyn. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. It's great to see you.